And the Epstein files were going hot and heavy at the time, and lots of games were being played with redactions, who's redacted, who's not. And I thought, well, let's just redact his name and see how that feels. And I mean, so basically, I was tired
It's
of
like an
seeing his
act of
name.
violence by the writer on a person who's irritating them.
But I mean, I think his name is too much with us.
Hello, and welcome to the Fiction Nonfiction Podcast from Literary Hub, where we believe every issue in your social media feed or on the evening news has already been tackled somewhere in literature. I'm Whitney Terrell, author of the novel The Good Lieutenant.
And I'm V.V. Ganeshananthan, also known as Sugi, author of the novel Brotherless Night.
All right, so I got a little history pop quiz for you. Who is Rasputin?
Surprise for you. I am Rasputin. I cosplayed Rasputin in school. He was a Russian mystic, influencer of and for Emperor Nicholas II circa 1905.
Did you say you cosplayed Rasputin? Because I didn't know that was a thing people did.
I had this seventh grade teacher for social studies who would always have us like act out history, which in retrospect, I don't know, interesting pedagogical choice. But I got assigned Rasputin.
Idea.
So, I mean, could be problematic, but I basically tied my hair under my chin to make a beard and really committed to the bit. And here we are.
American education. Okay, today we're going to talk about Rasputin, but not that one. We've invited novelist Ben Fountain to join us to discuss his new satirical novel, Rasputin Swims the Potomac, out this week. It turns out Ben has invented an entirely new Rasputin, one for these times and this administration. Ben Fountain's work has received the National Book Critics Circle Award for Fiction, the Penn Hemingway Award, the Los Angeles Book Prize for Fiction, and a Whiting Writers Award. It has been a finalist for the National Book Award and a runner-up for the Dayton Literary Peace Prize. He lives in North Carolina. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's a special thrill for us because we discussed Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk on our very first episode of the show all the way back in 2017. And like that novel, Rasputin Swims the Potomac is satirical. And it begins with a reporter sharing his account of an unnamed president's political rally, which is the first since the Supreme Court has cleared him to run for an unprecedented third term. Pause for our listeners to shudder in horror, as I did. This is all taking place in the not so distant future, and the president's name is redacted every time it appears, but we all know what it is. Anyway, the president is ready to celebrate, ready to campaign, but the rally is disrupted by waves of people experiencing a new and unexplained illness, which is called weeping sickness, in which people are overcome by emotion and break down in unstoppable tears, which like annoys other people to the point that they attack them. And the weeping spreads and spreads. It's a fascinating idea. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about how you arrived at the idea of weeping sickness and it interrupting the president's moment in this way?
Yeah. Well, I'm a desperate writer. And I'm just hanging on by my fingertips, throughout the writing. I rarely know where the story is going to end up. And so I'm feeling my way along line by line, paragraph by paragraph. But, in trying to capture the times we live in, the spirit of the times, just the vibe that's floating around in the air. I mean, I think there's a great deal of anger, anxiety, fear, uncertainty in our collective life and in our individual lives. And I was trying to figure out a way to crystallize that and to crystallize it in a way that would work in a narrative form. And it came to me, well, what about hysterical mass outbreaks of weeping? People just break down and start crying. And I think it's out there. I mean, as I said, I think there's a lot of fear and uncertainty and frustration out there. And as for the anger, I mean, anger is a secondary emotion. It comes from fear, anxiety, frustration, disappointment. And so you get these two things together, weeping, and then these equally hysterical reactions to the weeping, and that is violent attacks on the weepers. And I thought, well, this could go somewhere. So let's put that in the story and see where it takes us.
Okay, so we're going to get to going over some of the characters in this book and its plot beyond the weeping sickness, which we're also going to talk about some more. But I wanted to talk about some technical innovations that you have in this book. First of all, the president's name is redacted throughout. Yet, there are, like, everything else seems pretty familiar to me. You mentioned MAGA voters. You talk about Stephen Miller. I wondered if I have a theory as to why that was a useful thing to cut Trump or not put a blank square there. We also have to explain this so that when you read later, I don't know what you're going to do when you get to his name, but I wanted to talk about like why that was a necessary device in your opinion.
Well, it's not for legal reasons. I mean, if the First Amendment doesn't protect us if it doesn't protect us as we criticize, satirize, or even mock and ridicule the foolish actions of a foolish president, then, I mean, what does it protect us from? So it wasn't for legal reasons. Working on the second draft of the book, I realized I was really tired of looking at this guy's name. And I didn't want to play any kind of silly game with like changing his name to Stump or Rump and the Epstein files were going hot and heavy at the time, and lots of games were being played with redactions, who's redacted, who's not. And I thought, well, let's just redact his name and see how that feels. And I mean, so basically, I was tired of
like
seeing
an act of violence by the writer on a person who's irritating them.
But I mean, I think his name is too much with us. I think he's too much.
I do agree.
I think something is wrong with us when politics consumes so much of our lives, our collective life and our individual lives. And there's so much more to life than just politics. And so I thought, well, let's take that name away. Let's just redact it wherever it appears. And, as I started working through it, I thought, well, also it adds a bit of friction to the reading. And I think whenever we see the name Trump, such a complex of baggage and associations is connected with that name, it almost numbs our brains out. And I liked the way it read to me with his name redacted. It's a little bit of a speed bump, a little bit of a hitch in the reading. And maybe that micro jolt hopefully makes the reader a little more aware of what's going on in the book and what we're talking about.
I don't know how this was for you, Sugi, but for me, it actually allowed me to create my own voice for him, the character, when he's speaking, and not do it in a Trump accent, which was helpful, actually. I sort of was able to like imagine my own president there. I don't know, Sugi, how did it work for you?
I thought that, Ben, you did such an amazing job of channeling Trump's voice that for me, the Trumpiness was, I mean, I appreciated not seeing the name, but the voice is so on. I mean, it's really just an incredible version of him that, all of the catchphrases, all of the things, the syntactical fingerprints that we as writers recognize, they're also present in his strange little exchanges and monologues. So for me, I would have loved to invent my own President Whitney, but I didn't succeed because Ben was too good at conjuring. There's a part in the book, and I'm sure we'll get to this, where there's a character who kind of talks about how everybody wants to not name the problem, and even though everyone knows what it is. And so like this device also kind of stands for that in a certain way. I know I can't help but recognize that distinctive speech, the person who's always saying, please, thanks for your attention to this matter, or whatever little tick you put in. Last year, Steve Bannon, among others, claimed that Trump would definitely get a third term, despite the 22nd Amendment making that possible. And so the book opens with this court decision. And I'm curious about your relationship between writing about a fictional campaign for a third term and the actual public discourse. Do you think he's going to try to do this?
Well, I started writing this book in April of 2023. And I had a feeling back then that Trump was going to run for a second term. Well, I was pretty sure he was running for a second term, and I felt like he's got a really good chance of winning. And so when I started the book, that is the given. He is in his second term. He's getting close to the end of his second term. And just who he is, given his history, his personality, of course, he's going to try for a third term. I mean, this is not an individual who's going to go quietly into the post-presidential sunset. And so, just another given of the book is we've had this Supreme Court decision where, despite the 22nd Amendment, the clear language of the 22nd Amendment, the Supreme Court has said, well, he can run. Believe me, if this court wants to reach that result, they will find a rationale. And as a former practicing lawyer, I can think of several avenues of attack where you could go at the 22nd Amendment. So I'm writing about this in 2023 and 2024, and then he wins. And he wins the popular vote, and I'm still writing this book, and I feel like, okay, this is a live possibility. My feeling is, of course, he's going to run. He's going to try to run for a third term. And so then it's going to be up to the Supreme Court, and it's going to be up to the people as to whether that happens.
So those are the two sort of important I don't know if it's really a technical innovation to say that Trump's running for a third term, but that is a given important plot fact of the book. The other thing that was really interesting, and now we're going to get to talk about characters some, is this weeping sickness that Sugi described in the beginning and that we talked about is originally, first of all, it only affects white people, okay? So that, to me, is a real interesting complication, fictional and like metaphoric complication. And it's described, the person who describes this first scene that Sugi was talking about is a character, Clarence Thomas Jr., who's black, shares the name with a famous Supreme Court justice who does exist in this world, but bears no relationship to him. I wondered if you could talk about Clarence as a character, how you invented him, and why his perspective is so crucial to this story.
Yeah, as you're stalking a novel, people start to manifest in your head. And at first they're very hazy. Often they're very hazy. And then, as you think about it and you make notes, hopefully they start to crystallize. For me, it was, he had to be black. And he needed to be a black man of, a good degree of worldly experience and education. And this is a man who is looking, very alertly at our world and trying to make sense of it. And he's got the personal experience and the education, formal and otherwise, to go, I think, a good ways toward, trying to answer some of the questions such as, why is the world the way it is? Why is America at this point? What brought us to this point? What is it in our character and our history that's brought us to this point? He's trying to make sense of this very confusing, situation. He had to be black. That's the way he appeared in my head. I think, he brings a certain level of detachment and skepticism to the mainstream American narrative. And he was just, it just needed to be that way. As for his name, I felt like because of his name and the fact that he shares it with a Supreme Court justice whose judicial philosophy and history is anathema to him, he moves through the world with a little bit of extra friction. And there's something always like coming at him, which never allows him to relax. And it also, that name allows him to get into places where he might not otherwise get into. So, just in terms of the internal character, him dealing with the burden of this name, number one, and number two, there are times when all he has to do is say, I'm Clarence Thomas, and the door's open.
One of the things I love about fiction is why we all practice it, is that you can create scenes that that concretize emotion in ways that are too complex to explain in an op-ed, right? And so I feel like like the scenes where he is observing the sickness happening and not happening to him, and he's trying to watch, like there's something really important about the way that people of color are experiencing what's happening in America right now, and that's too simple to say, but I did appreciate that in the way he functions as a character.
I felt like it really got at the way that, I don't know, BIPOC folks are sometimes like, you realize this is part of a continuum of things that have been occurring. And then, I don't know, white people are off somewhere weeping because it feels new to them. I thought that Sorry. Anyway, we've talked a lot on this show about how the Trump administration's policy choices personal choices, personally branded bottles of bourbon, keep outdistancing any attempt at exaggeration or satire. And in Rasputin Swims the Potomac, the president is shooting a reality series set in the Oval Office called The Real West Wing. And he has an aide, Faith Spack, who is a former reality television show star herself. And given these kind of extraordinary facts and circumstances, one might think that she would be a hard character to make three-dimensional, but I feel like she had such a nuanced interior life that it was a really convincing and nuanced portrayal of why someone might love and serve a person like Trump. Could you talk a little bit about imagining her and then read a section from the book?
Yeah. I wanted somebody inside the White House, someone who's a true Trump believer, and I wanted the chance to explore the psychology of that and the emotional state of that. And it felt important to me to do that in a serious, respectful way. A lot of my family members are big Trump supporters, and they're smart, educated, good-hearted people. And, Faith she's around 25 years old. She's well-educated. She was raised by a single mother who herself is a bit of a celebrity. And her mother is hardcore Christian, and Faith was raised in that environment. Faith is also an illegitimate child. And her father is the richest man in Dallas, Texas. But she and her mother, they are sworn to secrecy. And there's an NDA to that effect. And as long as they keep it secret, Faith will continue to get money from her trust fund. So this is a big secret in her life. She was shunned by her birth father. And so I think it's fair to say she's got father issues. There is a patriarchal gap in her life. And I think part of her attraction and devotion to Trump is based on this, like it's emotion. And there's two sides of it. One side is the father figure. And I mean, Trump does have a very magnetic presence. If you've ever been around him up close, you can feel it.
I've never been anywhere near the guy. Have you been around him?
Yeah. I mean, he does. I mean, certain people, they're members of the Charisma Club, and Trump is a member of the Charisma Club. You can feel like his force field. It extends out from him, and people are just drawn to him. So there's that. But there's also a maternal aspect to it. Faith feels protective toward him. And when he's at his worst, when he's lashing out, when he's angry, when he's frustrated and confused, that's when she feels most devoted to him. So there's a kind of father figure, infant dynamic going on with Faith. And then there's, the politics of it, just, basic policy points. So, Sugi, you asked me to read a section, so I'll read about 2 minutes worth of Faith. And this is giving some backstory on why she's a Trumper. Contempt for Democrats is foundational to Faith's politics. Bunch of flakes and posers as far as she's concerned. The party of chicken shit sanctimony and woke bullying. So quick to get their tender feelings hurt, then they pounce like starved jackals. The flip side being her devotion to the president, an affinity she both can and cannot explain. So maybe this is her actual politics, not Republican and conservative or anti Democrat and woke, but redacted himself, redacted the man, the physical being, flesh and heat and voice in the force field of his aura. His constancy in the life of the nation has been her comfort and safekeep for all these years. He answers a profound need in her, and she knows she is not alone. Some 80 million voting Americans feel the same way. And as for his record, okay, maybe there's a lot that hasn't worked out so well, but is it really that bad? Best she can tell, people get up in the morning and go to work, then they come home at night and eat dinner and watch TV till their eyes blear over. How bad can it be when everybody's carrying on as usual? She is in the West Wing, but not of it. And as for those days when the politics is all up in her face, it's soothing to remind herself that she's in the entertainment business. Lately, she wonders if this means she's cynical. She's been doing this ever since the Biden trials, thinking about her thinking and the externalities implicated in her career path. She gets that certain politicians and their families might deserve to go up on criminal charges, but the Biden trials disarranged her in ways she still hasn't sorted out. How pitiful the family looked on TV, hollow-eyed, hopeless, exhausted, and her horror on realizing that she might be an accessory to their destruction. Joe always struck her as no better or worse than your average beltway sleaze, but what happened to that family seemed tantamount to a tragedy of war. Faith has built her right-wing resume largely on the back of her mother's Christian conservative connections, the career path of least resistance. And it's funny how the doors have always opened for her. Summer jobs, internships, fellowships. All she had to do is ask, and sometimes not even then. She knows residual celebrity has something to do with it, and her mother's generous political giving. But she wonders if other forces are at work. Signals sent through channels. This girl is favored, special. The right people like her. It's not unlike all those royal bastards down through history being showered with preferments in princely estates, all due to their backdoor DNA. At Georgetown, she majored in poli-sci and international relations, thinking she'd like to be an international lawyer someday. Jetting around the world, doing whatever those people do, this appealed. She graduated Magna and Phi Beta Kappa, thank you very much, and her plan was to work on the Hill for a year before law school. She landed a staff job with Senator Smoot, beating out only, about 300 other applicants? And from there, it's been a fast rise all the way to the White House.
Thank you very much. All right, so now we get to Rasputin, who, honestly, I have not done a lot of historical reading on the real Rasputin, if you want to fill us in on any of his details. But what we would like you to do is, this is the central character of the novel, along with Redacted. And I wondered if you could outline his history for us in the book and how he comes onto the scene.
Well, part of the inspiration of this book was trying to think my way toward what comes after Trump. If we continue on this trajectory of this blurring of reality and fantasy in our national life and our individual lives, and Trump has been an important step in this. And I mean, his real estate career, his reality TV show, his political career, they all represent a masterful blending of fantasy and reality. So I was trying to think, if we continue on this trajectory, increasingly blurring fantasy reality, what's the next step in this continuum? And I started thinking, well, it's going to be somebody where the fakeness is baked into the presentation. Everybody knows it's fake and they buy it. And I started thinking about pro wrestling and, the characters these performers / athletes invent, these personae. And I thought, well, we can go there. And there is precedent. I mean, Jesse Ventura, the body, ran for governor of Minnesota and won. But he ran as Jesse Ventura. He didn't run as the body. So let's take it a step further where the wrestler runs as his or her persona and never breaks character. and the public buys it. And so then Rasputin floated into my head. Came from I don't know, but it just felt like there was some real juice there. So let's assume it's this wrestler whose persona is Rasputin. And there is a paper trail which shows this person was born Patrick Walsh Strickland in Buffalo, New York, grew up in Buffalo, was a high school football star, played college football for 2 years, joined the U.S. military, was a Green Beret for 6 years. After his military service, he goes on a religious pilgrimage to Russia. 6 years later, he emerges. He claims he was in a Russian monastery for 6 years. He became an acolyte of the Russian Orthodox Church. And now he's this wrestler whose persona is Rasputin. And he goes so far as to legally change his name to Grigory Yefimovich Rasputin. He speaks fluent Russian. He's very well versed in the Russian Orthodox Church theology. He claims to be an acolyte of the church. He insists he is Rasputin. And so when he emerges onto the national political stage, I mean, he's already got a platform as a world champion wrestler. He never breaks character. He insists he is the Rasputin. And people say, well, how can you be Rasputin? You were assassinated in 1916. And his answer is, these are the mysteries of the Holy Russian Orthodox Church. And someday I will explain to you how this is possible. But now is not the time. So take me on faith. I am the Rasputin. And President Redacted, he buys it. He's like, yeah, sure, why not? And as he joins the Trump campaign,
which he does because he's the one who can cure the weeping sickness. That's his special talent. Am I giving away too much plot to say that?
No, not at all. I mean, the original Rasputin, was alleged to have miraculous healing powers. And, the young Tsarevich, the Tsar's son, was a hemophiliac. And there were times when it appeared he was going to die. And Rasputin would lay hands on him, pray over him, and he would come out of these crises. And so, the original Rasputin had these supposed miraculous healing powers in addition to this immense, overwhelming sexuality. And it's how our Rasputin does as well.
I mean, it also seems useful to know that Rasputin was an advisor to the last Tsar, right? Nicholas II. It was at the end of this particular form of government. They were about to be overthrown. And it seems like it's coming in at a time when things have become particularly corrupt, particularly unstable.
Yeah, I mean, as I started getting into Rasputin and reading biographies, it's uncanny the parallels between the last days of the last Tsar and his reign and what's going on in the U.S. now. I mean, there's various forms of hysteria floating around, all kinds of crackpot religions, all kinds of get-rich-quick schemes, financial skullduggery, political corruption, and tremendous anxiety and resentment among the population. And so it was really striking, the parallels between the last days of the Tsar and what we're living through right now in the U.S.
So Rasputin is someone who the president thinks he can have on his team. He has this bit of sweetness to him where, when people are in the throes of weeping sickness, he hugs them and consoles them in their grief. And through that kind of vaults to stardom. And the president thinks, this guy's mine, but he can't control Rasputin, actually.
Right. I mean, Rasputin, he's real. He does real things. He's quite an accomplished guy. He has real muscles. He's a real champion wrestler. He's got this military history. And yet he presents himself as this persona. And so we've got this mixture of fantasy and reality going. Who is he? What is he about? And that's one of Clarence Thomas's missions. That's the main mission in the book. He takes it on himself to try to solve the mystery of Rasputin. Is he a Russian spy? I mean, there are all those years he was in Russia we really don't know much about. Is he's simply one of the most talented con men of our age. Is he just what he claims to be, a professional wrestler who is really good at taking on the role of someone who believes he's Rasputin? Is he a monster of political ambition, and this is all part of a master plan? And yet, through all of this, I mean, there's real substance to Rasputin. He does have this healing touch with people. He's a very magnetic personality. He has this whole harem of beautiful women around him. Whether he's actually having sex with them, that's another question Clarence is trying to solve. I mean, the real Rasputin claimed he loved women, but he never consummated these relationships. But there's a lot of evidence to the contrary. And so Rasputin claims, oh no, the maidens and I, that's his harem, we have a very special relationship. So there's all this mystery surrounding Rasputin. But I think powering it all are these very real things that draw people to him.
Have you heard of this guy, Victor Marx, who's running for Colorado governor?
No.
I just heard about this guy this morning as I was waking up. Listening to my YouTube channels, which only talk about Trump, as we were talking about Trump's name being too much with us. And it's a Bulwark show was talking about this guy who claims that he's saved 45,000 people from enslavement, men and women, but he can't show any proof of this, and he does exorcisms over the phone, and he was talking about, I feel like,
convenience,
perfectly for our Rasputin time. Anyway, this character.
Yeah, I mean, we live in very strange times. And, I mean, every few years we hear the message satire is dead because, I mean, reality is such that you can't satirize it. And I don't know, maybe that's true, maybe it's not. When I started writing this book, all through the writing, the last thing on my mind was genre. Am I writing satire? Am I writing realism? Am I writing magical realism? I mean, I just wasn't thinking about that. I was trying to write the story as genuinely and authentically as I could. And now that the book is done and out there, there are these discussions of, is it satire? Is it this? Is it that? Maybe it's all of those things, a combination of all of those things. Satire, realism, magical realism.
I feel like when people say satire in a critical way, what they really are trying to say is well, the characters aren't that believable in the way that a real fiction novel would be, but these characters are fully developed and three-dimensional to me as a reader. And so it read like any other novel in terms of their psychological, realism,
I appreciate that. That's what I was shooting for. I mean, you have tragedy on one side, you have comedy on the other. And tragedy, you could say tragedy is when the people don't realize their mistakes until it's too late. Comedy is when the characters realize their mistakes in time to rectify. So then the situation becomes funny. Maybe satire exists on this, nervous continuum between the two. I mean, huge mistakes are being made. But is it too late? And so maybe that's where the tension, if there is, useful tension in this book, maybe that's where it lies.
Do you feel like writing this kind of, I guess when you were writing it, you just said you weren't thinking about writing it as satire, but if you were to compare it to the experiences of writing your earlier work, like say Billy Lynn or something else, do you feel like, I mean, of course, when we're writing, our writing has a relationship to the current world because we're, by osmosis or whatever, we're surrounded by that environment. So do you feel like your relationship to the facts as a fiction writer has shifted since that time?
Well, I think, the responsibility is still the same. To see the world for what it is and try to find the words in the narrative that will portray it accurately. And so, Billy Lynn, I was writing that in 2010, 2012, and it portrays 2004. I mean, all the dynamics that were in play then are very much in play now, and I would say even more so. The line between reality and fantasy has become increasingly blurred. It's even harder now to tell what's real from what's fake. And part of that is the increasing dominance of screens in our lives and the rise of AI and, all this extremely, deceptive and convincing, this false reality that's being presented to us as reality. And so it's harder for us to make sense of our lives. And I feel like as a writer, it's my obligation to get that on the page. And does that make the job harder? Well, it was always hard. It's never been easy. And it's just the challenge. I just viewed it as the challenge before me. And my job was try to get that reality on the page.
So Rasputin claims that the West's salvation lies in the East. And Trump, and by extension the MAGA right wing, has had an obvious obsession with all things Russian, dating back to his very first term, which seems like complete bullshit to me. But why does such a large part of America seem willing to abandon our own traditions for this sort of imagined AI slop, as you're talking about, like screens, Russian ideal? I mean, in the book, these Russian Orthodox crosses start showing up, and it's perfectly believable to me that such a thing would occur.
Yeah, as I was finishing the book, I started seeing articles on how the Russian Orthodox Church is gaining great numbers of converts in the U.S. And they tend to be young men. And, what is the psychology behind that? And I think there's something powerful in human nature, and it's in all of us to a greater or lesser extent. We're drawn to authority figures. We're drawn to people who seem to know what they're doing, who seem to have special insight, seem to have charisma. And I think that's a powerful thing in human nature. And I think for a critical mass of our country, there are people who are willing to go all in. In a way, it's a relief to be told what to do and what to think. I mean, you're released from responsibility. I think it's an infantile stage of human development, and it's a dangerous condition to be in because it leaves you vulnerable to all kinds of manipulation. But I think there's a powerful strain in human nature, this draw toward authoritarianism, and I think we very much see it playing out in our politics. People are drawn to this authoritarian president. And of course, Putin in Russia, he is very much an authoritarian strongman. And he's using the Russian Orthodox Church, as a tool of control and power. And so, Rasputin, with his own history, he has his own, relationship with the Russian Orthodox Church. So to me, it just seemed that would be a natural part of the dynamic, this melding of the, Rasputin says, well, the U.S. and Russia, we are the two great Christian superpowers of the world. And it's only fitting that we become allies to create Christ's kingdom on earth. That's a powerful message for a lot of Americans.
So Ben, as I'm listening to you talk, I'm developing a syllabus in my head for a class called The Political Ridiculous, because we've had all of these great writers who are writing in relation to the Trump administration. We talked about Shadow Ticket on this show. I watched the last season of South Park with my husband, where that kind of infantile, I see you've seen it, that infantile dynamic is there, right? And then there's also, I don't know if you've seen The Regime, which is written partly by Gary Steingart, just set in an unnamed Eastern European country with the dictator played by Kate Winslet. And she temporarily separates from her husband to partner with a crazed military devotee of hers who they kind of have a season where they control the country, and the kind of aesthetic of that there's something very Putin-esque about the whole thing. I was watching it and I got to the credits and I was like, of course it's Gary Steingart. And so I'm imagining this class, and I'm just wondering, like, what are you reading or looking at? What did you think of South Park, which so many of us were, I was watching that to be like, what happens next? Is Satan going to have Trump's baby? I was weirdly on the edge of my seat.
Well, I thought it was brilliant, and wonderful and hilarious and serious. It's allowed to be all of those things. I mean, that's the reality we're living in. I found myself thinking about past masters of the American ridiculous, and people like Kurt Vonnegut and Terry Southern. I mean, Vonnegut is name-checked in Rasputin Swims the Potomac. Terry Southern actually shows up in Rasputin Swims the Potomac. James Baldwin gets a number of references in a different vein, but he was very alive to American hypocrisy, absurdity, ridiculousness, but in a different vein, obviously, a much more somber, tragic vein. I mean, Joan Didion, in her own way, could be quite hilarious, writing about politics in her dry, droll way. So, and Norman Mailer, too. I mean, I know Norman read and did and said many silly things, but he was also quite profound about American politics. And so those were the past masters I've been thinking about. I mean, in our own time, I'm very devoted to the writing of Fenton O'Toole and Darrell Pinckney, Zadie Smith, Marilyn Robinson. I think they've all had really perceptive things to say about where we are right now in their nonfiction, and in several of those cases, their fiction as well. So, like I said at the beginning, I'm a desperate writer, and I'm looking for insight and education wherever I can find it, because I find the times to be extremely confusing and bewildering, and just in trying to write my way toward a coherent narrative that might shed some light on all this. I mean, I feel like I never know enough. I'm always trying to learn more. I need to know more.
Ben, thanks so much for joining us today, and congratulations on the publication of the book. Listeners, please be sure to pick up a copy of Rasputin Swims the Potomac at an independent bookseller near you.
Thank you, guys. This was a real pleasure.